Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for some of you. Welcome to the Center for Grateful Leadership April 2022 webinar. And we are so happy to have all of you from around the world with us today. We have a very exciting presentation. You've been hearing about it, the SMART mission on people, projects, and the importance of appreciation with Dr. Edward Hoffman. And there's no one more qualified, I believe, to talk about a SMART mission than Dr. Ed Hoffman. He was with NASA as Chief Knowledge Officer and some other very important titles for 26 years. And Ed has just really taken everything that he's learned from his time in NASA, the good, the bad, and the neutral, and put it into a book, into a course about the future of work. He's a senior lecturer at Columbia University School of Professional Studies, and he has his own company. He's CEO of Knowledge Strategies, LLC, and they do research and consulting services to support organizational performance. Also, Ed has recently co-authored a book called The SMART Mission, NASA's Lessons for Managing Knowledge, People, and Projects. Its two other authors are Matthew Kohut and Lawrence Prusak, and this is published by MIT. We're very, very happy to have Ed here today and to just really give you the inside story about how to make your teams work, your organizations work, using some of the most important things that you can do. So we're going to go through this presentation. It should be a little over a half hour. We'll have plenty of time for a Q&A, and then we have some exciting announcements to make at the very end, and we'll also introduce and remind you to come back in June. So you've heard a lot about Ed, and now I will introduce you to the real person. Ed, take it.
All righty. Thank you very much, Judy. It's a pleasure to be talking with you, and hopefully you can see my screen right now. If I'm a NASA guy, so this is mission control. Are all systems go? Can you see the SMART mission? I assume you can. So
Yes.
Judy and I and our colleague Laverne Johnson, we've been colleagues and friends for a very, very long time. One of the things that I have loved about working with Judy and the International Institute for Learning and now the Center for Grateful Leadership is that there's an understanding, in my view, as to what is most important in terms of successful work, successful teams, leadership, and really what's important for society. And it's a focus on people, and people from the standpoint of appreciation, gratitude, respect, and so on. One of the things that I did, and what I want to do with you now is take about 25, 30 minutes to lay out my ideas, my experiences, the research and work that I've done. And then I want to leave about 20, 25 minutes for questions. I think that, that would probably be a good way to go. I want to give you a little bit of a background. So I was appointed the first NASA director, the founding director of the NASA Academy for Program, Project, and Engineering Leadership. I was asked to go downtown to Washington to set up that academy shortly after the Challenger space shuttle disaster. So I'm aging myself. The space shuttle disaster took place in 1986. We lost 7 lives. And when it was studied, and there's case studies all over, it was really a failure of leadership. It was a failure of communication, and really, I would argue, respecting and working with people. And I was asked to establish the academy. And over the years, I have trained, I've worked with, I've supported project teams in the tens of thousands. And the one thing that I always say is, if you don't remember anything else we're teaching you, if you don't remember anything that I say, the most important thing for an effective team, for an effective leader, is to, one, respect your people, respect the people you're working with, and to create an environment of inclusion. And based on that, one of the things that I started doing, which is connected to our collaboration with Judy for a couple of decades now, is I would ask teams when I worked with them to take the first 10 minutes to tell me what they most appreciate, what they're most grateful for in their lives. It could be about the NASA project, it could be about work, it could be about their spouses or anything else. But I would always start a team effort discussing that, and would then have small group discussions and paired discussions. And what you find in just 10 minutes is people start thinking about what they appreciate, and that totally transforms how they learn, how they work, how they share knowledge, and their own sense of well-being. So I think it's a very, very vital kind of an activity. I want to share with you what I consider to be the SMART mission and why. One of the questions I would ask you to think about, I am a very big believer. I teach at Columbia University for the last 10 years. I always tell my students, you have to have a journal. You have to have something where you can write down. One of the greatest issues in terms of organizations, I found that when I got to NASA, is that we're so busy. We're going to meeting, we're taking on different issues. We're looking at new technologies, and people would tell me, Ed, I don't have time to reflect. I don't have time to learn. I don't have time to do what we're doing right now. I said, you don't have an hour to learn, to talk, to have discussions. And so we had to learn in our organization. We had to create a culture that respected taking time to reflect. And we would actually give people journals, and we would give people the task of write down each day, what are the 2 or 3 things that stand out? And I'd ask you to think, what has changed in your life over the last 2 years from the standpoint of work? What are those things that matter most to you? What are the things that are gains, things that are better today than maybe 2 years ago? What are the things that are losses that you want to address? And what are the actions, the future implications that you take? One of the things that I think is so important about reflection is that it settles time for us to think about what's happening, but it also indicates to me self-appreciation for ourselves. We get too busy doing other things, taking care of other people, dealing with issues, and at the end of the day, we haven't taken care of ourselves. So one of the things I would say is take down 2 of the 3 things that stand out. I want to say that I have been someone who said, if you go to my LinkedIn, what I have there is people, people, people. And about 5 years ago, I was talking to a person from LinkedIn, and she was looking over my profile. She said, oh, this is very good. Wow, you work at NASA, Chief Knowledge Officer, look at all your contacts. She said, but boy, you write yourself up awful. I said, what does that mean? I write myself up awful. She says, oh, you have all these words no one reads. You have to describe yourself in a sentence or less. And I smiled at her. I said, I've been working for like close to 30 years. How do I describe myself? And it was a great question she asked. She turned to me and said, what is the thing that you consider most important in terms of your life around work? And I said, that's easy. People, people, people. He lit up. She said, that's it. That's what you're about. So I always have argued the importance of the social framework. People say, is it always important? Social, technical, you need both. However, in my experience at NASA and working with the Project Management Institute, I would argue that there are 3 kinds of projects or change initiatives that we have. One is technically geared. It's typically small, it's within a team. We're working together. There's not larger organizational interference. There's no international framework. And you can probably get by just with technical capability and a little bit of the social taking care of each other. An example of that we talk about is the VITAL program. JPL, at the start of the COVID challenge, NASA was tasked to come up with ventilators in a fast way, quick way that can be used. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory had a very small team of technical experts. Hadn't done this before, but they came together. They were totally insulated, and they took care of what they knew of from the standpoint of their capabilities. Most programs and projects and tasks and change that you're dealing with are probably things that impact your larger organization. Those are things that require at the macro level technical capability, but also social skills, political skills, the ability to get along with people, the ability to deal with stakeholders, the ability to create positive environments or it doesn't get done. And you know this. And then the third type of project is very complex. It is an increasing importance, global projects. It's where there are international partners that are involved. And it's vital then, not only to take care of the technical and the social, but also the international cultural one. One of the things started at NASA was an international project management course that included folks from NASA, folks from European Space Agency, Italy, France, Germany, as well as folks from Asia and South America. And largely it was about coming together to learn how to work in a spirit of effectiveness, but also appreciation. So the social and the factors of working collaboratively together and appreciation are more important as you work, obviously, with a larger community. I just want to acknowledge that up front. One of the questions I'd like you to think about, maybe write down, and you can put it in the chat, or we can talk about this another 20 minutes. What is it you most value and appreciate about the work you do? What is it that you most value and appreciate about the teams that you're on or about the projects you're involved with? Again, this is similar to what I always start with when I work with project teams, is I want to focus on, are we appreciative of things? Are we grateful? I want to see where people are. If people say, I love working here, this is great, I really love the people, I respect them, they're great, and they talk about that, I know that I and they are going to have a great experience. If I have anything off to that, then we have to address it. And so what I'd like you to think about, and on your journal, write down what is it you value and appreciate about where you work, who you work for, who you work with, and we'll come back to that. So I was asked to background on the SMART mission, NASA's lessons for managing knowledge, people, and projects. I was asked to write this book about a year and a half ago. And I've been asked for a number of decades, writing about your experiences of setting up the NASA Academy, your views on learning development, the importance of people. Everything you're always talking about is people. It's more important than technical and process, and you should write a book. As Judy knows very well, I like doing this. I like talking to people. I like engaging people. I don't really like the solitary nature of a book. But the publisher and my editor, who's a wonderful woman, Emily Tabor from MIT Press, said, do it short, but get it out there, and you can work with people. You can work with Larry Pruzak, who's written 5 of the biggest best-selling books of the last 30 years. Good friend, good colleague. We worked together at NASA. Matt Kohut, who's the best-selling author of Compelling People. How do you influence? How do you communicate? Good friend. Worked together again at NASA. And I said, if I'm going to do this and enjoy writing, it's going to be with these folks. And that's what we started doing. And what we ended up finding is I didn't want to do a book that says this is the answer. What I wanted to do is when we work with successful organizations, when we work with successful projects, when we work with successful leaders at NASA, at John Deere, at IBM, at Google, wherever it's at, what are the factors that make us successful as leaders, as teams, as organizations? So we didn't start out with a framework, but we started out with a notion of we see and we know what effectiveness does. We consult and advise many organizations and government agencies around the world. What is it that leads to the success? And from that, we really started putting together the story of our experiences of those 30 or so years at NASA. And these are some of the factors. I am going to go through them quickly so that you can, so that there's just time for questions. But at the core of everything, I would argue that if you don't remember anything, going back to what I said to the NASA people, to people working projects, to people working together, you will get the technical requirements right because you're good at that. You will get the economic costing things right because you have to. the thing that is the greatest risk for a project, the thing that is the greatest risk for a society and a team is that we assume the people thing will take care of itself, and it doesn't happen naturally. We have to work at these things. We have to encourage these things to take place. Let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. First of all, starting point. I love working with project teams. I love working with the International Institute for Learning and with the folks I'm here because they're committed. They're crazy about the work they're doing. It means a lot to them. They know what their mission is in terms of learning. When I worked at NASA, for the most part, I was working with people. They were there because they wanted to be there. They could talk about their dreams. It wasn't always lined up to what the senior organization was doing, but they had a sense of mission. And based on that, this was important. They brought their energy, they brought their intelligence, they brought their passion to be successful. All people, any place I've worked all over the world, government agencies in all different places. People are, when it's working, they're proud about what they're doing. They see purpose, they see meaning. You go to a pharma place, you see picture of children on the wall. You know what that's about. That's a message of what we're doing here really matters. If you talk to people who are working in a fire department, they know what the importance is of what they're doing. Every organization, every team, every individual, every leader really has to have a sense of what is it we're striving for? What's the vision? What's the dream? What is it that we want to commit 110% to? I would speak at NASA. I want you committed to the project 110%, because if you are, you'll do the things that are necessary to be successful. If you have a mission, then you want it to be run in a smart way. In other words, things will not go as planned. I could always tell the inexperienced new project managers. They would come out of the class and they would call me a couple weeks later and said, "There's something wrong with with the books you gave us." I said, "Oh, what's that?" They said, "Real life doesn't go like that. I was giving this project, I was given this budget. They've cut me 10%." I said, "Don't worry about it. They're going to cut you 10%, multiple times. It's not going to go the way it's planned. You're going to have to change." And so you're going to have to work with people. You're going to have to work with stakeholders. You're going to have to get answers. You're going to have to learn. You're going to have to adapt. But if you're clear on working together, if you work with respect, if you reach out to people, if you're learning, if you're doing the things I'll be talking about, then success happens. But to me, it starts with having a sense of purpose and mission. So from the standpoint of, starting point, I would argue that in the current age that we're living in, the most important asset that we have is knowledge. Let me give you a couple of quotes to kind of give a sense of that. I've been reading more and more over the last few years the work of economists. Now, this is strange. I didn't like taking economics in school. I found it too quantitative, data-driven, impersonal. I was always a psychology kind of person. But there's been an interesting thing. Let me read you a quote from really an eminent economist, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, Joe Stiglitz. And this is what he's recently wrote. "In the 21st century, the only source of competitive advantage for a company or a nation is finding a new idea and incorporating it. Nothing else. In the 21st century, the only source of competitive advantage for a company or a nation is finding a new idea and incorporating it, nothing else. It's about ideas and it's about getting it done." He also said, it is trust more than money that makes the world go round. He's an economist. And increasingly what's taking place is the economists are recognizing the importance of what they call the intangibles. What's an intangible? A tangible is what we do when we're working together effectively so that we're innovating, we're learning, we're taking care of people, we have a voice, we tell stories, and there's appreciation and trust throughout. Final quote. David Teese is another major economist. Economists are important because they're about well-being for individuals, organizations, and societies by measuring the growth of wealth. How do we become more effective? What David Teese says is any organization is really just knowledge and relationships. knowledge and relationships, an economist, he argues, and increasingly what's coming up is this notion of the intangible economy. Previously, up to about 10 years ago, assets came from power, from muscle, from land, from things we owned. In the last decade, in the future, it's the knowledge and intelligence of people working together. So you have to have the relationships, you have to have appreciation, or people will not share that with you. So knowledge is essential. One of the questions I'd ask that I'd like to maybe discuss another 10 minutes when we come for questions is, when you have a big problem at work, and some of you may not ever have problems, but if you have a big problem at work, what do you do to solve the problem most effectively? You have a problem, something you haven't seen before, something you have to take care of. How do you go about solving that? Because the ultimate issue that we're facing in this dynamic VUCA, technology, artificial intelligence, service-oriented economy, project world is we have challenges and we have to find the answers. And what I would say is, when I ask this to audiences, and I teach at Columbia University, my students are working professionals, typically in their 20s to their 50s. Even the young people will say what they first do is look for someone they trust to ask, how do I handle this situation? In general, knowledge is profoundly social. If you trust me, you will ask me anything, you'll ask for help. If you're not sure, you won't do that. The essence of project success and failure is finding solutions and having relationships where people are trusting, where they're appreciative, where there's psychological safety, and where we take care of each other. I've had people say this is common sense. Common sense is not that common. There's a great difference between successful teams and organizations and those that struggle. Knowledge, therefore, is one of the key principles for an organization. And I was the chief knowledge officer the last half a dozen years of my career at NASA. It was congressionally directed. It was something NASA supported. A lot of resources and funding goes into that issue of knowledge. The other side of the coin is, how do you get knowledge? David Teese, I mentioned, coined the term dynamic knowledge. He says we're in an age of dynamic knowledge. What he says by that in his articles is that things constantly now change. You don't get a degree and then have the ability not to learn again, to live off of that. As a matter of fact, my students expect to change positions almost every 2 years. One of the big concerns is, do they get a degree? Do they get a certificate? Do they do micro? How do they keep up with constant change? New technologies, AR and VR, artificial intelligence, customers changing orientation, design. There's so many different things going on. We're in a state of dynamic knowledge, things constantly changing. And the one advantage there is to have a strategy for learning. What does learning have to do with appreciation and gratitude? When I was a graduate student a long time ago at Columbia University, I was getting my doctorate at Columbia in the 1980s, and thank God for that. That got me into NASA for an internship, and it changed my life. But during the early couple of years until I started the internship, I have to tell you that I hated my time at Columbia as a graduate student. I was nervous, I was anxious, I was getting sick. It was the only time in my life where I was starting to have a drinking problem, because after class I would go to the West End bar in Manhattan. I would drink with my colleagues, and I wanted to do everything kind of to avoid the place. I would take the train actually back to Brooklyn. It would take an hour and a half. I loved the hour and a half getting away because I was nervous. I didn't feel worthy. I didn't think I belonged there. I didn't feel, how did I get in there? Did I sneak in? And I had one professor who I started working with who seemed to, I was sure, hate me. He would find every fault that I had. He would tell me I wasn't doing well. I got an internship at NASA from another professor. When I got to Cleveland at the time, I had a letter from this professor. And I opened up the letter. I don't know how he got my address, but I got the letter. And basically in it, he says, this is a big mistake, you going to NASA. You haven't really focused. You don't think like an academic. I'm not really sure you belong here at Columbia. If I wasn't nervous enough, I was more nervous. And this was the relationship, and I had to work with this person. When I got back to New York for some of the research that I was doing, we were having a event, a class at his house, at his apartment. And his wife came up to me, who was a wonderful woman, really friendly. And she said, "Hey, Ed, how's it going?" I said, "Okay, Madeline." She said with a big smile, "You know, my husband loves you." What came out of my mouth was, "Madeline, you don't have to lie to me." And she looked at me like, "What? What are you talking about?" I said, "He hates me. I mean, I'm like a punching bag." She said, "That's strange. He always talks about you and says you're his favorite student." So I've thought about that years, decades later, in terms of this, and what would it have been like for me if I really thought that he cared for me, if he thought that I was a top student, if we had a different relationship. Probably would have learned better. I wouldn't have thought that the school was a gothic horror show. I would have drank less. I would have enjoyed life much more. Uh, it's important to acknowledge he probably did. I guess I believe her looking back, but it was never communicated. When I got to NASA as a senior leader, I was presenting to the senior leadership. Very early in my career, I was nervous. I got kind of pounded, as is normal, in a place at NASA. When I went outside, I had a senior executive from the Marshall Space Flight Center come up and said that was really a good job. And I said, "Again, you don't have to, I got killed in there." And he laughed. He said, "Oh, when we beat you up, it means we love you." I said, "What do you do when you don't like what's taking place?" We have problems expressing appreciation, and I think it has creates a lot of issues for teams. I don't think you can effectively learn as an organization. Matter of fact, I know that research indicates that. The work of Amy Edmondson, you may be very familiar with, on psychological safety, is that if we're afraid, we can't learn and we can't have an effective team. So learning is vital. Stories are very interesting because we tell ourselves stories. Organizations tell stories. Leaders, presidents, societies tell stories, right? Stories are a way we communicate a direction. As a leader and as an organization and people leading projects, the best leaders have an effective, a positive story, a realistic story, but it's a story that we can be successful. We can move forward. Give you an example of the power of story. One of the best leaders at NASA was an individual named Jim Odom. Jim was a senior leader at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. I got to know him towards the last number of years of working at NASA, and he was one of the nicest, most delightful, just sweet, I would say, individuals. Great leader and just someone nurturing and very friendly. I always valued him, particularly during some of the difficult times that I had. He was always there to lend support. And there was a story that I was told. The Hubble Space Telescope, he was the project manager. He was the second project manager, right? And the first project manager was removed. Congress, people were upset at NASA. It wasn't funded right. It was overscheduled. There were big problems, lack of trust with NASA. You're not focusing on it. Jim Odom is brought on to be the second project manager. And the first meeting he held with the senior project scientist, who was very angry about how things were going on the project, this individual turned to Jim at the first thing he says was, "I am going to make your life miserable." He said, "Odom, I am going to make your life miserable. If you had taken over an organization, a task, an initiative, or a project, and someone who was key to working with you said that, how would you respond to that? How would you react?" Let me tell you what Jim Odom did, and I think you'll get a sense of what a great person, great leader is. He turned to the individual and he said, "Actually, I think we're going to have a wonderful relationship. I think we're going to really enjoy working together and appreciate each other." And the project scientist turns to him and he says, Why do you think that?" And Jim said, "Because we both have the same mission. We want the Hubble Space Telescope to be a great success for our country, for society, and we're both committed to making it work. And I'm committed to making it work for you and with you." And story, changed the whole relationship around. And after that, they had a very effective relationship. Hubble went on to had future actually challenges, but went on to be one of the greatest programs and projects. Jim Odom, when I walked with him around the Marshall Space Flight Center, people would come up and say, "Oh my God, do you know Jim Odom? We love him." He's like, good people. They work off of appreciation. They work off of respect. They work off of a connection with people. About 30 minutes in, let me go a few more minutes, and then we'll get into maybe a discussion. A large part of my life was not just about working with individuals. It was, how do teams work effectively? When I got to starting up the NASA Academy, I thought the key issue is, if you get smart, talented, passionate people, you can throw them together and they would figure it out. It doesn't work that way. There are unique skills to how we work together in a team, and we had to train our teams in how to do that. We really had to work that. I always learned to say that the performance of a team, the performance of a project, happens at the team level. And what I mean by that is, I saw project teams put together where the most talented people in their different disciplines came together, and that team struggled, often because they didn't work well together, they didn't communicate together, they maybe competed together, but these brilliant people had trouble working together. And I saw teams that had good talent level. You have to have a basic level of talent, but they were not the best. They were acknowledged as not the most talented in terms of their technical discipline. But they so worked well together, they so communicated, they so collaborated, they took care of each other, that when problems came out, they were overcome. That's what I mean by project performance happens at the team level. Give you a story on that. One of the things that I did in addition to the individual development was, as I mentioned, project team support, performance enhancement. Got a call one day from the #2 at NASA, Chris Scalise, who says, "Ed, we're having problems with this project out at the Goddard Space Flight Center. I want you to provide some of your team support." I said, "Chris, that's okay, but I only work if I'm invited in by the team." That was kind of the culture NASA said. And he said, "I know that, but I don't care. You need to work with them, because we're probably going to cancel this project. They're a disaster. There's international problems. People are fighting together. Cost overruns. I don't expect anything to happen, but I figured let's give it a shot." That was the kind of background to that. So we started working with the team. I was working with a colleague, Charlie Pellerin, who's written his own book years ago, How NASA Builds Teams. And we collected data, interview data on the teams. It was a couple of centers working together. It was an international partner. It was a university, which is fairly typical for science missions. When we read and reviewed the data, it was some of the worst data we have ever seen. These people didn't trust each other. They didn't like each other. They competed to each other. It was awful. Got on the phone one night with Charlie, and Charlie says, what do we do with this? This is the worst data I've ever seen. I mean, we're scheduled to meet with them for a 3-day workshop. Do we show them? I said, we got to show them the data, show them exactly what they're saying about their team. And at that point, we'll know. If they don't believe it, if they don't care, we might as well end there. But if they commit it, let's give it a shot. The data was shown on a screen in front of the room, and for what seemed like a long 5 minutes, there was teetotaling absolute silence in the room. And then at one point, the systems engineer, the technical lead for one of the centers, says, "That's us, and that's an embarrassment." And then the second voice was the project manager from the other center, who said, "You're right, that is us, and it is an embarrassment." And that opened up to a conversation of people saying, it's an embarrassment to us, to NASA, to the country, to our international partners. But we recognize that we competed with each other. We wanted to have lead. Different things were happening. We didn't communicate. We need to overturn it. That team ended up becoming Project of the Year a few years later, and their team dynamics were dramatically different. I would argue that goes back to the ability to take care of each other. It wasn't the technical capabilities, it wasn't the process capabilities, it was how they worked together, how they appreciated each other, and how that led to communications. Talk more about that in the book, but that's an example. Teaming comes down to that. And the most important thing in terms of a team is psychological safety, the ability to say anything and still say safe together, to keep things moving. And the ability to do that is through gratitude and appreciation. Culture are the behaviors that we think make us successful working in an organization. For the sake of time, let me not talk about that. But one of the principles for effective teams, organizations, and leaders is they understand the culture that they're trying to create. They try to promote it a certain way. We've heard about growth mindset. We've heard about psychological safety. We've heard about participative styles. We've heard about agile kind of environments. These are cultures. These are behaviors that we believe are important to be successful. And effective teams and leaders and societies reinforce these. I won't say more about that now. The final principle that I think is more and more important is global collaboration. Here it says collaboration, but increasingly, and in the book, we call it global collaboration. And that chapter is filled with a wonderful story, but it's kind of painful now. It's about the International Space Station. The International Space Station has been nominated at different points for the Nobel Peace Prize. To me, it should have gotten it for the basis that over 20 nations from around the world came together and basically build living space that has been continuously connected with humans, with people, doing science, doing work, living, doing exercise for over the last decade, and they did it collaboratively. Major things that go into just that. It's a wonderful case study. Obviously, part of the issue is that after the fall of the USSR, NASA was directed, along with its partners, to work with Russia, and to do that, and became a very successful relationship with the engineers and with the technicians, and that's taking place. People about a year ago were saying, well, do you believe that global collaboration is always going to be the way? I'm a believer that that's very important, but we can't take it for granted. And we see some of the current environments. So collaboration is very important. To give you one quick example, I set up a number of years before I left NASA an international project management community. It was a committee of leaders from France, from Germany, from Japan, from South Korea, from Brazil, from different countries, and NASA, the United States. I recognize that the Japanese space agency, JAXA, they had a very strong, very proud leader who was frustrated over the years with NASA, that he didn't feel NASA listened to partners effectively. I was going to fly out to South Korea to meet with Kari about this and about other things. And I had a very experienced leader from international relations, Jim Zimmerman, said, Ed, stop off in Tokyo on the way there. I said, stop off in Tokyo? Jim, I'm going to South Korea. I'm going to be there only for a couple of days, and then I'm coming back. He said, stop in Tokyo and meet with the head of the JAXA program office, the engineering office. So I did that. I stopped. I thought it was crazy at the time. I was exhausted, got into Tokyo, and I had a meeting. It was only about an hour meeting, and I met with the individual. And he turned to me immediately. His first question was, did you just come here, stop on your trip to South Korea to meet with me? And I said, yes. I said, I said, what? He said, it's important. We have a wonderful relationship with Japanese. It's the oldest NASA international partner, and value. I want you as part of the International Project Management Committee, and I know you're the leader, so it's important. And he said, this is wonderful. I've never experienced this from NASA, the United States before. He said, I do appreciate this. Thank you for stopping by. I'd like to show you around the city, and you will always have my support for the International Project Management Committee. Appreciation and gratitude isn't a nice to have. It's essential for business and project results. So what does good leadership, what does good projects look like? I'll close this and then go to questions. One of the things that I'm very fortunate, I've had a wonderful career at NASA. I've had a wonderful 10 years at Columbia University with students, with my colleagues and faculty. Had a wonderful career with the Project Management Institute as a strategic advisor. I'm grateful for the work I've done with the International Institute for Learning with Laverne and Judy and the team. Those are pictures of the students at graduation. Those are the pictures of students I have when they're partying, my family. I always remind myself about appreciation and how lucky I am if it's a bad day, if I'm dealing with a difficult typical environment. It makes me feel better. I think it makes me more effective. And it's things that I think make us more effective. And the SMART mission is really about this. It's about how we work together in these 6 principles. So let me, at this point, I think, stop. This is a little summary. I think you get the, you get the slides, so you'll see that. Here are some tips for that. And I think we'll go to questions. The book is out for pre-order now. I would be very grateful if you're interested in either getting that from any of your sources, local or beyond. And I'll turn it over now to Judy. So I will stop sharing. And
actually, Ed, can you keep sharing, please?
okay, let me start again. Okay, all right.
Well, I'll just voice my appreciation, Ed, and my gratitude for the incredible presentation that you just gave. And I hope that everybody takes it to heart and engages in a SMART mission. Because as you said, you can't have a SMART mission without gratitude, without appreciation. And your stories from your academic career are just mind-boggling and make one wonder how this can continue. But that's why we have the Center for Grateful Leadership, and that's why we emphasize this and stress it. So thank you so much. And I think we've got a couple of questions. Stephen, would you just help us with that?
Yep, no problem. Let's see. How do you reconcile these concepts with the remote collaboration trends where the only communication is via Zoom, chat, or phone?
Yeah, I think one of the good things, looking positively, is that we've gone through, crisis with the pandemic. And we've learned to be productive. We've learned to be successful. So I think the best organizations are basically looking to leverage things like this. This is wonderful to be able to come and talk. And I think there are people around the world and we're in different locations. So I think we leverage that. I think we look to get back to placing value on face-to-face. I was brought up at NASA that when you work with teams and international teams, you try to have meetings for a couple of days, a few days, once every 6 months, and make sure you take time to have dinner or lunch. You want to eat together, you want to drink together, because the most important thing is the socialization, the building the trust, seeing each other, going to the side, talking about things. And then the next 5 months, you can actually work at a distance fairly productively. So I think we've always kind of been doing that. But I think it's a good question. I think we have to really think about what are the challenges of isolation, of loneliness. We're seeing increases in well-being and suicide, the great resignation, where over 50% people have left their jobs. I think it's about the fact that there's a lack of, of appreciation, lack of we're taking care of each other. People want to go to places where they're valued. I hear that from my students all over. I have students working at leading companies, and they tell me a story. I have a student who's working at a leading consulting firm. She's leading a major area. And I said, you must love it there. She said, I'm looking for a different place. Do you know of any? I said, why do you? She said, they don't get it. I said, what does not getting it mean? And she says, I have the great title and it's a nice job, but I don't think they care. They never talk to me. I've had leaders who roll their eyes about what I'm doing. I don't really get heard of. I'm a young woman. I think that's partly it. But I know I'm not valued here, and I'm not happy. I need to. So here's a very talented person in a major position. We have to take care of each other. Remoteness, distance makes it more difficult, but we can overcome it. But we have to talk to people, and we have to find ways to have conversations. I ask my students when we are doing the classes, we do it for a couple of hours, please keep your cameras on so we can talk and see each other. If you need to get off, that's okay, or go away. Within the courses, I meet with the students at Columbia 2 times a year. I get to go up to New York. And so we socialize, we celebrate, we have dinners together. So, and I emphasize the importance of, I have to make sure that this is a safe environment and a respectful environment. That's very important to do. So I think we have to use the skills and the capabilities that are out there to take care of each other, whether if we're working at a distance or when we are face to face.
Next question. Is it possible to be honest in any project? I've always found that honesty is at the lowest step. If you stay honest, then half the problem solving is possible.
Yeah, I think honesty is essential. Well, honesty is it's respect. You know, if I work with, so I've worked with Judy for, you know, a couple of decades. And although we look really young, I would say we look really, you know, if I work with Judy and we're not honest with each other, or she says one thing to me or another, one of the greatest compliments I felt, and is true for, again, the International Institute for Learning, is when I was in government, anything I did, I had to get permission from legal. And Judy will remember this. And there are things I could do, things I couldn't do, what could be. And I remember there's one time we had a request. It had to be a quick turnover. I was worried about it because legal typically wants to take their time. And they were concerned with the time frame. And they said, oh, these are these folks, IL from New York. I said, yeah. I said, oh, they're wonderful to work with. Anytime we get their stuff, it's good. They're responsive. We really appreciate working with them. And that speaks to things. At the core, honesty is essential. You cannot have appreciation, respect, any of these things without it. I've seen people game. That's just crazy. I'd rather you be rude to me than game it. That's the ultimate disrespect. And people sense it. Humans, like dogs, can smell, you know, what's going on. We can sense when people are disingenuous. One of the compliments I got throughout my career at NASA with my students is that I've been told that we trust you, we believe you, you're genuine. And I think that's the core of honesty. I think that's essential for projects.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that I thought that was a great question. And Trent,
Yeah.
he said it was the lowest step. I think you meant that in a positive way, that it's the foundation
Yeah.
of everything. If you don't have honesty, and that's why when people, you know, they take my course and they go out, they go on an acknowledgement spree, even if they don't mean it. I have to specifically say to them, only do it if it's 2 conditions: heartfelt and authentic.
Right.
Because acknowledging people inauthentically is worse than not giving any acknowledgement, or worse than your professor who I'd like to talk to him. I'd like to include him in the what not to do's in the next edition of my Grateful Leadership book.
He told me one day, kind of funny, he said, you know, when I got my doctorate, I got beaten up, I got abused, and it was painful. And you're all going to experience the same thing because it's good. And he, you know, he thought that was the way to do that. And I've always been a person, if you want something, ask. When I get pushed back, I grew up in Brooklyn. When I get pushed, the natural reaction is to push back. So it didn't work, but yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions that people have? Stephen, do you have any?
A couple people are asking Ed if he could share the slide on tips again.
Sure. Let's see. Okay, thank you for asking that. I wanted to get to time for this interaction, so if you have any things there, and these are slide. This is a slide that I talked to teams about, actually, about things that you need to take focus on. And from the standpoint of teaming, to me, it does start with gratitude, and I do. Started that at NASA. Again, what I would ask people initially, how many of you are grateful for the project you're doing? If I got 70%, 80% of hands up, I'd say, well, what's going on with the other 20%? And we'd have a discussion. And sometimes there's, people needed to go to someplace else, or sometimes there's different things going on, but very, very important. And all these, I think, are things that come together. Listen to the stories, by the way, in do it in a family, but certainly in a workplace. And are they stories of optimism and possibility and respect, or are they Stephen King horror stories? And NASA would spend a lot of money, understandably, they would send in inspectors to work 3 days with a project team to see where it was. And I would always joke with leadership. He said, 3 days, I can go in and sit with a group for 15 minutes. I'll tell you how they're doing, how they talk, how they react to each other, what they say when they're outside of the meeting. It's all there.
And Ed, I was thinking when you were talking about Dr. Amy Edmondson and psychological safety, I know that, I'm not sure if you started it or it was something that you were a part of, but the newsletter that NASA had,
Right.
My Best Mistake. I love that. Can you tell us about that a little bit? I've used that example in so many of my presentations because
Thank you, Judy.
Amazing.
So we started as part of Knowledge Sharing Stories, a Academy Sharing Knowledge journal. And so the organization really changed its culture through the use of stories and listening to each other. And one particular day, I served under 5 administrators in my time. One of the nicest, most wonderful, most genuine was Charlie Bolden, who just a wonderful, he was an astronaut, did the Hubble repair in the shuttle, and just the nicest. I always used to say, call me Charlie, just such a wonderful person to this day. And one day he was visiting the Goddard Space Flight Center, which is about 30 minutes outside of headquarters in Washington. And he came back, and the secretary called me up to his office and said, "What's up?" He said, "I was concerned." He says, "I was talking to the, about 100 of the project managers and engineers. And I said, at a place like NASA, this is a place where you can say anything. You can say anything to me because it's an open environment, it's a trusting psychological safety." And he said, "Do you all agree with that?" And, people said, "Well, not really." He said, "What do you mean? You don't trust what you would say to me?" And he said, we trust you, but, this isn't a place where you can really say anything to leaders and all that kind of stuff." And so he basically said, come up with a way and a strategy so that we're comfortable saying and talking about our mistakes, talking about our failures. So I went out to that same group a week or so later and said, you told Charlie it's, don't you feel that this is a place where it's important to share honesty and tell the truth and all that? And one of the engineers in the back said, "Yeah, we think it's very important. It's a good strategy. Why don't we have the senior leaders try that first? Then we'll see how it goes." And so I went back to headquarters and I said to the leadership, I said, I spoke to the folks, and what they would like is the senior leaders to talk about their mistakes, to talk about what things that they've messed up. And then they'll see from that. So we started a thing. It was a little comic. I'm in the process of moving from this house to the Eastern Shore. Otherwise, I'd have it out. But it's called My Best Mistake. It was set up like a comic book, about 30 pages, little cartoons. And it had leaders at the time at NASA talking about some of the dumbest mistakes and failures that they initiated, they were a part of. And I didn't think much of it. The first day it went out, I got a call from a young woman who had just started at NASA. She said, "I love the knowledge program. I love the academy." And I said, "Well, what do you like?" She said, "I really love My Best Mistake." She said, "I love working for a place where leaders are comfortable talking about their failures. It makes me feel better about the things that I do." And I had started with, who had been around now by 30 years. He called, he said, "I really love that." I said, "What do you love about it?" He said, "I love that we finally gotten to the point where we can just tell the truth about mistakes." And so it created an environment, again, I think, where we appreciated each other a little bit more, that we were human. And I didn't think that was going to have that big impact, but it had a very big impact. So that was My Best Mistake. You can actually get it online if you do a search, NASA, My Best Mistake. You can see all the stories.
Still doing it, Ed? Are they still doing it?
But that's accessible. I've been out 6 years, so they still do different forms of that. They have one day a year one day a year where they have a stand down day where everyone stops and they listen to stories about where we've had failures with the loss of life of Apollo, Challenger, Columbia. They bring in the family members that survived that and hear about it. They talk to engineers, and it's meant to get an appreciation for life, but also the importance of the work that's being done, and not to get complacent.
That's amazing. And
Yeah.
I think all of our organizations could emulate that. They really could and should. Ed, do you
It's a
still
good
have?
question. I was going to
Yeah.
say it's a good question you asked, because to me, all these 6 principles are, the use of story is very, very powerful. As you know, we've talked a lot about that. Learning is essential, but they come together all around the human element.
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to thank you again for this amazing presentation. People have been asking about the recording. You will receive a link to the recording because people want to replay it. These are not people who came in late. They just found it so valuable.
Thank you.
And if you can just move to the next slide, I would appreciate it, because we've been talking about appreciation and gratitude. And these are 2 tools that I've developed. One is the 5 C's of acknowledgement. It's just something that's very simple to get the process going with your teams and the discussion, very simple. And then the 7 principles of acknowledgement that just make it clear how critical and available people to acknowledge, excuse me, are. So what to do, how to do it. People love tools. If you would like copies of these posters, just send me an email at judy.umlas@iil.com. If you want one or both, I'm happy to send them. And I'd love to know what you do with them. How do you put them to use? Do you use them on your teams? Do you use them in your families? I had somebody from the police department where I did training years ago come to me the next day and say, you got me in real trouble. I said, what do you mean? He said, I used those 7 principles of acknowledgement. I acknowledged my wife completely. And she said, what did you do wrong? That was why, she thought he had never acknowledged her before. So you got to do it slowly, a little bit slowly. But anybody who would like that, I'm happy to make that available to you. judy.umlas@iil.com. And then the next slide is just, we have 2 courses, on-demand courses that will really go through all the ins and outs and talk about stories. A lot of storytelling. It's very interactive. There are videos. And they're on demand, so at your own time and pleasure. And then last 2 slides, we want to make sure that everybody joins us for the Agile and Scrum online conference. June 2nd is the launch day. Live keynote speakers will be answering your questions. A lot of great stuff. 2 on-demand courses that are free, 26 PDUs. And then last slide that we have is, let me see, I think there's one more to go.
IPM Day.
Yes, I wanted to announce that Ed and his 2 co-authors are going to be keynote speakers at International Project Management Day. It's IIL's 19th annual IPM Day conference. And they will have a keynote, and the topic will be the SMART mission, as it relates to the book, and it'll be filled with tips and tools and insights. And we just invite everybody to come to that. That's in November. You'll get a lot of notification about that. So thank you very much, Ed. Once again, thank you. I thank each person who was here today. We had a huge crowd. I'm so honored. And those who want it, well, you'll all get the link. And we'll see you in June.